Our topic is slavery, and I'll be covering slaves' punishments, slaves running away, and slavery mostly in general. The picture on the left shows how the voyage to Africa, and the picture on the right is about John Rolfe, who set up the first colony in Jamestown. This is John Rolfe in the sea going to Africa.
These are the people from America who are taking a voyage to Africa where they're going to explore the new land. This picture shows the settlers coming to Africa and exploring the new land along with kids, women, and men.
Eventually, they didn't find much in the land, and most of them went back, bringing along some new skin-colored people. This is when they came home, and as you can see, they have different skin-colored people, and these are America's first known slaves.
This picture shows slaves working tirelessly on fields picking cotton. You can see that they are very tired and very exhausted with little to no food and harsh working environments. And little children, such as the one in this picture, also have to work, so it shows that the white people show no mercy towards the slaves. This picture shows the tobacco fields that slaves have to work tirelessly to pick. They work for over 18 hours with little to no food and no breaks. They have to pick acres and acres of tobacco and other products such as cotton and food for the white people. And
after they were done picking from the cotton fields and everything, they would eventually come back and eat in their little cabins. And they didn't eat much, but this is a picture showing tons of slaves by those cabins, and there's only a couple of cabins, which makes space really tight and really not roomy for people, and it's very uncomfortable. This is just a family of slaves, and about every single one of them is all related in some sort of way, because the families were all brought together. No one just picked a guy and left. They had to pick the whole family, and this shows a whole family, and you can kind of see how tired and relentless they are and everything. So
this picture below shows a group of men who are being held for slave trade. The slave trade was a great part for businesses for white people. They would earn more money and help other white people with their slaves. This picture also shows that the white man is threatening the slave and putting him up to knife point. So it just shows how relentless and cruel they were back then.
And also, these are all men, and they've been ripped away from their families. This goes more into depth about the slave trade, because you can see that there's a white guy selling them, and there's white guys standing around to buy those slaves. And you can see a woman standing up on a podium with probably her daughter, and they look very sad because they've been ripped away from their own family and are being sold to different slave owners or white people, which is really upsetting in this time period because that shouldn't be allowed. In this picture, you can see how probably a white slave owner has rounded up a bunch of different colored people, and they're probably going to get sold or something, because the guy in the front who's white looks like he's gonna make an offer to him, and you can even see how these children are being sold, and that just goes to show how ruthless these white people were back in slavery time period.
This is where the punishments of the slaves were implied. In this picture, you can see a slave owner is basically ripping a child out of the man's hands, and he's being whipped for taking action against it. This goes to show that white slave owners were very cruel and ruthless to the slaves. They would give even harsher punishments if they attempted to run away, steal food for their families, or deny to work. This was one of the more harsher punishments that the slave owners applied to slaves. They would, as you can see in the picture, they would tie their hands up so they're basically defenseless and they can't do anything. And they would take a smacker almost like that, which is bristled with tiny little needles, and slap them multiple times across the front, chest, and the back. This would many times injure or sometimes even kill slaves, depending on how their health and how healthy they are and how much they can cope. So this again just goes to show that there was no mercy for people who didn't follow the rules.
This picture shows the white person's perspective on a colored person, because the person up in the corner has run away And this is kind of their perspective even on everyone. They hate them, and you can see the word Negroes. Back in the day, that was a really bad word, and they didn't care what they did, and they thought less of them as a person.
They would put rewards on slaves because of almost $1,200, which seems a lot now, but back then that was a lot of money for people because they didn't have as much. So it just again goes to show how much like these people are worth to slave owners.
This picture demonstrates a white person's perspective too, because a slave hunter is among us means that there is someone who is like Harriet Tubman, who's trying to smuggle slaves out and get them out of slavery and like bring them to the north where slavery is illegal. And if there's an arrest warrant tonight, so if they see this person, they're going to arrest them because that's breaking the law in the South. Like that's like probably one of the number one laws, maybe, which is why this is a big deal. And they also would try to, and the white people would also try to arrest like anyone who ever does that or anything, because it was so important to have as many slaves as you could, to do as many work as you can, to rack in like the moolah and stuff.
This picture is a picture of Harriet Tubman, who was one of the most famous slave hunters of all time where slavery existed. Harriet Tubman worked for the Union Army for a while, first as a cook and a nurse, then as an armed scout and spy. She helped slaves come from the south to north through the Underground Railroad, which was a series of passages where it was very hard for slave owners to track slaves and get them. She escaped to Philadelphia in 1949 and then came back to Maryland to rescue her family because she loved them and she didn't want to leave them behind to cruel white people. So this just shows that not all black people stay and don't do anything. They do make a difference for other people. This picture shows a young colored person being chased by slave owners, and you can see that she's trying her best attempt to escape, but dogs have also been let loose to take her down, and she probably won't make it far, which is really sad because they tried their best to escape, but many were not as fortunate as Harriet Tubman or other slaves who got to escape to the north. And her punishment will most likely be extreme torture or death or no food. So it just goes to show how cruel slave owners were if someone tried to escape.
Yeah, and if you look at the guy on the left, he's holding handcuffs and something in his other hand, so most likely she won't be too fortunate. This is a skin-colored guy, and he looked like he is traveling away from slavery because he wants to find a better life in the north. And as you can see in the bottom, it says the runaway, which definitely means he's trying to get out of slavery, just like most skin-colored people who were enslaved were trying to do. And this was like probably the number one goal of everyone because slavery was so cruel and unforgiving and relentless. Eventually, good prevailed in slavery, and almost all of the skin-colored people were let loose because of freedom. And some of the events that happened before this, like the civil rights movement and everything, and like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, which led to this. And soon slavery was abolished and it was no longer allowed in the South. And every skin-colored people seek their number one dream, which was to have freedom. And eventually they all got what they wanted. And it was a big turning point in America's history.
Yeah, Abe Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which abolished slavery for good. Many people didn't agree with his methods, especially in the South, but the Union or the North were extremely happy of this because now everyone can live and be equal together. These are the sources and credits that we used to create our documentary. Many of our sources were secondary sources, which means that many of them were just written facts, but we had a few primary sources which showed actual pictures from back then. And without these sources, we wouldn't be able to make our documentary.